Well, hello, everybody. This is our 18th Catalyst check-in for 2023. Great to see people joining from different parts of the country and around the world. I want to acknowledge our traditional custodians, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in Melbourne, and their connections to land, sea and community. I pay my respects to elders past and present and thank them for their skillful stewardship of this wonderful land of Australia. And as we were discussing before the call, I'm sure many people are bitterly disappointed by the outcome of the Voice to Parliament referendum on the weekend. I was out handing out how to vote cards. I enjoyed the conversations that I had. I was in a seat that returned 80% yes, so not typical of a lot of the country. So I'm pretty disappointed, but I'm encouraging people to look beyond that, as we were talking about, Donnelly, to the fact that this is now a national conversation that we can't escape. People are now connected into a genuine dialogue around the well-being of Australia's First Nations people. And it's taken some time. And I was really heartened by some of the remarkable young Indigenous leaders that I've seen in action and stepping forward in this. So, you know, it doesn't diminish the outcome for everybody who works so hard on it, but I think there's some really promising green shoots. And across the ditch, our Kiwi friends are bracing for some pretty substantial shifts in policy with the new Conservative government elected on the weekend. So I just wanted to let Trish and our other Kiwi friends know that actually we're here if you need a shoulder to cry on, because we've all been there. And also to those, you know, watching the Middle East, it's just devastating to see the way this conflict is being waged yet again, these big historical patterns that really profit nobody, benefit nobody, and leave so much carnage in their wake. So all we can hope is that sane heads prevail. It's pretty hard to see at the moment, but, you know, fingers crossed. So on a more positive note, we've got some great conversations coming up in the Catalyst group before the end of the year. On Wednesday, November the 8th, we have a morning Zoom call with leadership advisor, author and podcaster Ed Brenegar, who was featured in the book The Neo-Generalists, a really terrific guy. He was on the call with Kathy Allen the other week. And gratitude to Elisa Hewkins from Sydney for setting up a quick Zoom conversation with the Crazy Might Work team out of Sydney, so they can talk about their work with NASA as part of the 4D leadership program. And that's on around lunchtime on Friday, November the 10th. So I'll get the Zoom link out. And if you can't make it for whatever reason, I'll record it. And on Wednesday, November the 15th, we're back in Sydney for a face-to-face. We're going to look at the myths and realities of genuine systems change. And as some of you know, a few of us have been involved in some work in the housing arena, but you know, we come up against the same sort of preconceived ideas and signal failures, and yet, you know, it's really hard to find really, really good examples of systems change. So we'll be looking at that. We have a working session on Zoom on Thursday, November the 23rd with our friend Mandar Apte, the former Shell exec and founder of Cities for Peace, on peace building in your backyard. Mandar was recently appointed to an international working group exploring ways to bring more young people into peace building activities. I think you could just say right now, bring more people into peace building activities. And our final Zoom session for the year is on in early December. We're going to hear from Northeastern University Professor Loredana Paduran on her book, the work behind her book, The Job is Easy, The People Are Not. She's an awesome, really interesting entrepreneurial academic. I mean, defies description, Romanian. I don't know what it is about Romania, but I've just met some really cool people out there. You probably know a few, John. And then we're starting to slot in a few sessions for next year. And John, who's on the call, is going to join us to talk about rituals, hopefully, which I think we need to actually look at some of the new rituals that we need to create that are more fitting to this time of the 21st century. Productivity, new work models, you know, what healthy urban ecosystems look like. So we've got lots of stuff in train. But today we're going to look at how people get big stuff done, one of our favourite topics, through the eyes of one of our Catalyst members, Donnelly Patman, who joins us from, I'm sure it's sunny, Donnelly, sunny Perth, where she's now based after many years in Melbourne. And as many of you know, Donnelly's an entrepreneur and activist and the founder of conservation group for the love of wildlife, or FLOW. I'm really excited that I've actually broken Donnelly and she's agreed to speak about her own experience, because she's a remarkably humble person. But I think Donnelly's story to me really speaks to many of the elements that we do discuss time and again in this group. How compelling visions are shaped and maintained, the characteristics of those who deliver big change, and how collective action is effectively mobilised, and particularly over time. So just a quick recap, if you don't know Donnelly's work to date, she's a designer by background. She's also a successful business person and company director whose significant achievements in wildlife conservation led to her being awarded an Order of Australia Medal in 2017. Donnelly's now set her sights on creating one of the biggest rewilding projects in the world, to address biodiversity loss and mitigate the impacts of climate change. You know, the usual sort of run-of-the-mill objectives. So what I find so impressive about Donnelly is her natural abilities as a catalyst, to identify and build those critical relationships across very diverse fields, and to set in train a range of things that ultimately do lead to substantial and widespread change. So usually such significant reforms I think, can only be understood in retrospect. They often seem to kind of grow out of these seemingly random sparks or small actions. So I'm really interested in what motivates people like Donnelly to start, to persist through the messiness, and to what helps them deliver when so many other well-intended efforts and people just give up and go away. So let's put Donnelly in the hot seat and find out more. And yeah, look, feel free to give her a bit of generous prodding during the Q&A, because she deserves it. So Donnelly, thank you so much. Over to you.
No, thank you, Josie. That's an incredibly generous introduction, and thank you. And thank you all for making time for hearing my story this afternoon. It's I'm always a little nervous about these things, and it's been a while, but I'm also just getting over a cold, so I'm a bit croaky, and I'm going to refer to notes because I'm not clear-headed. So and if I can just start by asking everybody to take in a really deep breath and just hold that breath in our heart for a second. And as we exhale, just exhale your expanded heart into the world. And so I'll start. So Josie, shall I share the slides? Right. Okay, have I got that right? All good?
Perfect.
Excellent. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start with how I flipped from from corporate into conservation. And so in WA, I had a corporate design business for more than 25 years, and I focused in the resource and mining sector. And I specialised in annual reports and prospectuses, and over time my mining clients grew incredibly wealthy, and then started asking me to help them with interiors. And that's really how I ended up in Melbourne, because I came across to Melbourne in 2008 to study interior design. And I think it's probably worth noting that I've always had this belief that the first 50 years of my life would be about cleaning up my act, healing, looking at my baggage and my shadow, so that I could be really effective for the next 50 years of my life. And so a lot of time and money spent on therapy workshops and spiritual quests, which led me to a workshop with Andrew Harvey in South Africa in 2011. And Andrew is a mystic, a religious scholar, author, and came with the term sacred activism. And he has this belief that, you know, your spiritual practice is of no use if you're not putting it to good use in the world. And I'm a really practical Taurian, so that always appealed to me. And so here I am in South Africa, and so very excited. And we are woken up before dawn, and we're wearing our headlamps, and we're going out to see lions in the wild for the very first time. And so as we head out, and it's really cold, and as the sun starts rising, we come around a corner and we come across this group of lions known as the Royal Pride. And this is an area in Timbavati, and it's known as the Sacred Heartlands. And we were told not to lock eyes with the lions, that to stay silent, you're in to be respectful, and bow your head if they're gazing at you. And we just, I just couldn't believe what I was witnessing. I had never seen anything so exquisite. I always get emotional. And I locked eyes with one of the sub-adult males, and I couldn't take my eyes off him, despite the instruction is that I was locked in, and I was sitting in this vehicle. And then I started this sobbing, and I tried to be as quiet as I could, but again, nature had just pierced through me, and my heart was blown wide open, and I couldn't unlock eyes with this lion. And so I don't know how long we were there in the presence of these animals, and just the field as well. It was just exquisite. And we went back to camp, and we had breakfast. And after breakfast, Linda Tucker, who's the CEO of the White Lion Trust, and Andrew Harvey started talking about the plight of lions. And they started talking about this barbaric industry called canned hunting, where animals are bred purely to be shot in enclosures. And I was also told that lions were likely to face extinction in the next decade. And we were in an extinction crisis. And I was just mortified that I didn't know that. How could I not know that we're in an extinction crisis? And so the more they described the plight, the more angry I became. And here I am again. I've just had this extraordinary morning, and this energy starts rising up in me again. And this time it's rage. And I'm trying to sit on this primal energy that's coming up through my body, and I just couldn't. I had to stop and ask Andrew what the hell was going on. And I had to admit that in that moment, I was so enraged that I had the capacity to kill. And it really shocked me, because I just, you know, nobody expects that they have that in them. And Andrew said to me that by locking eyes with the lion, that I had somehow, well, not somehow, but I'd been initiated like any enlightened being can do. They pierced right through you, and it had unlocked a deep place in me. And so when I kind of breathed through what I was going through, and it expressed, it kind of moved the energy. And then Andrew said this to me, and he said, now that you've been brought to your knees, in your indignant rage and your despair and your grief, I want you to go out into the world and do something about it. And you don't come back from something like that. And so back in Australia, I started contacting conservation groups. I started animal welfare groups, and nobody was interested in talking to me. Even though Australian volunteers were paying up to $1,000 a week to hand raise these lion cubs, thinking they're involved in conservation, when actually they were participating in the supply chain of lions for the lion bone trade and for canned hunting. And so December 2012, I was invited back to the trust, and it was an incredible time. And it's where I met Pippa Hankinson. And on the plane out of Hoedspruit, we both pledged to do more. So Pippa went on to create the multi-award winning documentary Blood Lions, which is now on Netflix. And I came back to Australia and it was leading into a federal election. And so I started writing to all of the mail that I had in my letterbox, saying that what disturbed me and what was of concern is the extinction crisis, the plight of Africa's lions, and the fact that Australians are participating in this brutal industry of canned hunting. And so I received a phone call from Jason Wood, who was running for the federal seat of La Trobe and for the Liberal Party. And he was successfully elected. And I had a meeting with Jason, and he basically said if what I was saying was true, he'd do something about it. And so at one of Jason's events, he introduced me to Malcolm Turnbull, and all I had on me was a business card that was for my design business. And I really thought, if I'm going to be serious about this, I have to set up a professional platform. I can't just keep doing this as a kind of a sideline. So in February 2014, I founded For the Love of Wildlife and spent 18 months working with Jason Wood and then Environment Minister Greg Hunt on doing something about this. And so I held rallies and events, all sorts of things. And then in March 2015, just 18 months later, Australia was the first country in the world to ban the importation of lion trophies and body parts. And that was followed by France and the Netherlands, with the US implementing really strict import laws. And if you take away the trophies, hunters aren't interested in the kill. And large conservation groups that I contacted to announce the ban said that I was wasting my time, that work like this takes 20 years. And also, that's never going to happen with the Liberal government. But what they didn't know, that I was working with the lioness from the White Lion Trust, who is named Nebu, and it's her face that you see in the logo. So she is the CEO of For the Love of Wildlife, and I just feel like I'm basically guided by her. And I've had extraordinary experiences in Africa with people like Craig Foster, which many of you know will be my octopus teacher, Anna Breitenbach, who's an incredible animal communicator, and various others. Stella Horgan, who's a very dear friend of mine and director of For the Love of Wildlife. And with all of that kind of experience and training is to be able to see the world through the eyes of an animal or through the eyes of wildlife. And understand that nature is this incredible field of intelligence. And then when you allow that to work through you, it's an incredibly different experience, and it allows you to find the kind of the cracks in the system, I suppose. And so that was the work, you know, fast and furious. I spent most of that time chasing after myself, like finding that once you set up a charity, you've got to do all these compliance things. And anyway, we somehow managed to, to get this done. And then the following year, I was in Chapel Street and found ivory for sale. And given that there'd been a global call to close all ivory markets, I was surprised and couldn't quite believe that that was the case. And so made a few phone calls to find that in Australia, it is legal to buy and sell ivory domestically. And there's an assumption that once it's in country, it must be legal. And also we did an enormous amount of interviews and found that most people thought that it had already been dealt with, that with Australia's strict borders, why would we allow the trade in ivory and rhino horn? And so with collaborative partners, we started the No Domestic Trade campaign, and I hired a crush and invited the public to bring their ivory to be destroyed, with the message that the only real value is on a living animal, that ivory is not to be sold and traded. And I managed to get Colette Dinnigan to be our ambassador. She's a South African Australian. And then with her PR company, we managed to get a lot of celebrities to write quotes and to support the crush event, and that really helped with Jason Wood being able to trigger a parliamentary inquiry. And also during that time, I was collecting evidence, and one of the things that I found that to be shocking is how complicit the antique and auction industry were. Happy to write receipts for ivory stating that it was camel bone, and also telling their clients that if they soak their ivory in tea, then it would make it look old. It's all just happening under our noses. There's also a belief in Australia that wildlife crime is seen as a boutique crime, and even though we've got strong laws on paper, the judiciary barely implement or prosecute to the full extent of the law. And also anybody being prosecuted, it falls between environment and trade, and usually both of those portfolios aren't interested in following up with something like that. Environment mostly because it's under-resourced, and trade, it's not an area that they're all over, so it just keeps getting battered between one and the other. So the parliamentary inquiry was really fascinating to us because it made it very clear that the legal trade in endangered species, which is under the CITES, which is the Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species in Wild Flora and Fauna, hadn't been modernised since the 70s, despite being one of the largest and most lucrative trades in the world, is unfit for purpose, it's opaque, it's severely under-resourced, and it allows the illegal wildlife trade to flourish. I can see you, Paul, nodding your head, you know all about this. And so given the work to date, we became acutely aware that addressing extinction drivers species by species is glacially slow, and we were not going to have any impact. So what could we do that have the most impact for most species and the biggest piece of work so that we could get something done quickly? And so with Lynn Johnson and Peter Lanius of Nature Needs More, our tiny grassroots organisations focused on fixing the legal trade in endangered species, and we met with more than 33 countries in modernising CITES with a 3-step approach. And the 3 steps were to convert CITES from paper-based to electronic permitting, which would then integrate with customs. Also to do a reverse listing so that businesses can't just trade until somebody notices that there's an issue. It's worth noting that to list a species on the IUCN Red List or on CITES for trade restrictions usually takes between 11 to 24 years. And the other part was that those that are profiting from trading in wildlife or endangered species actually contribute. And we were proposing a 2% levy on trade. When you consider it's worth billions of dollars and CITES is so severely under-resourced, it just seemed like an obvious fix. And so I was invited to attend the launch of eCITES, which is the electronic permitting system, which was developed by UNTAD, the Swiss government, CITES, and the Sri Lankan government. And it could be rolled out to all 193 signatory countries for the low cost of $30 million. And yet we don't see any of the large NGOs in conservation interested in participating. The same year that I went to Sri Lanka in 2019, Australia announced at the CITES COP that it would close the domestic trade in ivory and rhino horn. So another successful piece of work in getting that commitment from the Australian government. And then in March 2020, I was booked to meet with the Indian government and attend the Wild 11 Rewilding Conference in Jaipur when COVID changed our worlds forever. And so Nature Needs More has continued with the CITES work, with many countries implementing eCITES, but I wanted to do something more earthy and for Australian wildlife. And knowing that Australia has one of the highest extinction rate in mammals in the world and one of the highest rates of land clearing, it just seemed like an obvious fit. So back to my design days, when I was working in the resource sector, I received a call from a corporate lawyer friend of mine saying he and his mate Doug had come up with an idea to fix outback Australia, and they wanted to hydrate vast areas of degraded land using Mars-style rovers, which they'd named Quendas. And the ultimate aim was to sequester the carbon in the atmosphere and to help mitigate climate change. And given what I wanted to be involved with, I thought this was excellent timing. And of course, for me, I just immediately went to, oh my God, there's so much degraded land in Australia. We could create the world's largest rewilding project. How fabulous. So these two diagrams, in the 10 key solutions, the only one in that list that can draw down carbon that's already in the atmosphere is the restoration of our biodiversity. And the map of the rainfall shows the rainfall over the last 50 years, and it will show you that the areas that are drying out is where we have our main agriculture at the moment. And the areas that it's getting wetter is the areas that are degraded, and the rain's just basically washing the topsoil off and it's not hydrating the land. So that's the area where we want to focus. And so here's the design of our first Quenda, and it won't look anything like this when we get to having our first one built. But the idea is to emulate what the bandicoots used to do before, and now in inner Australia, so many of those small marsupials are extinct. So Quenda is a subspecies of the southern brown bandicoot, which is the name derived from the Noongar Budjar word Quinda. And so Rob and Doug's vision was to build a fleet of low-cost, autonomous, solar-powered Mars-style rovers that mimic what these small marsupials do in digging shallow, angled micropits into the ground. And rewilding is the large-scale restoration of nature until it can take care of itself. And so restoring habitat and natural processes, and where appropriate, reintroducing threatened and extinct species. And see, rewilding animal populations to enhance natural carbon capture and storage is known as animating the carbon cycle. It is among the best nature-based climate solutions available to mankind. So in the last 2 years, since I had that phone call from Rob, a prototype has been promised, and we've been doing a lot of work with the networking and engaging government in this idea of returning Australia to the savannah it used to be. But with Rob with his legal practice and Doug with solving the housing crisis by building prefab homes, Quenda just wasn't moving along. So I moved back to Perth last November, knowing if I wasn't in Perth to drive this, it was just never going to happen. And unfortunately, in April this year, Doug suddenly passed away, and we were back at the beginning. And so Rob and I wondered if we could pull this off without Doug, as he was the engineer. He's an ex-farmer that could build anything to solve anything, a brilliant and enormous-hearted man who wanted to do good for humanity. Oh, and this is a graphic that I stole. I saw it recently on social media, and I just think it's perfect given what we're talking about. So Rob's law practice specialises in native title law, and with that has relationships with several Indigenous groups in WA. And working with these communities, there is access to vast areas of land that have been farmed and mined to death. And with these partnerships, the opportunity to create sustainable jobs in remote communities gives traditional owners a financial return on the country whilst improving the land. It's also important that we work together to be informed by nature, as she's directing where the work should be required. And so we have the potential to reverse 200 years of land damage and create the savannah Australia used to be. So today we have a greasy garage, we have an investor, we've got engagement with the federal government and a major university who are launching a project, Healing Country, next year, and there's an opportunity for us to participate in that with them. We've employed a Metatronics engineer and have an engineering firm who are helping us build our first Quenda, and we expect trials to start in March next year. So it's a long-term vision, it's an earth-centred business, and it relies on nature's cycles, but I'm prepared to put it in process because we just can't wait we just can't wait anymore, and it's a deep passion of mine. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna Lee. Wow. It almost leaves me speechless. If you'd finished straight after the flow achievements, that's amazing. And now we've got the next chapter. So I'm just going to jump in, guys.
How do you fund it?
Very practical question.
Well, Jacinta, when I, like the whole piece with when the work started, I just thought if I don't, you know, I had that kind of moment where I thought, am I going to really be serious about this work or not? So I actually sold my house to fund it, as how I started. And then and I kind of had this assumption that once I got some, you know, runs on the board, that people would want to donate, but it doesn't kind of work that way. So a lot of hard knocks, and it's still a major problem with having the time to do the work and also fundraising. But we have got quite a lovely group of people who love what we're doing and, you know, contribute when they can. So that's been really good.
I've got one more if I can. I saw just this week on LinkedIn or somewhere this awesome drone that drops this sort of self-propagating seed into the ground and then self-drills itself in, doesn't just lay on the top of the... Is that your work?
No, that's not our work.
Do you know the one I mean?
I do. Yes, I do. So there's a whole range of approaches, and for us, it's really about, there's so much land in inner Australia that is just this hardened crust, and especially in WA where it's seriously just been worked to death. So that requires a little bit more help than just dropping seeds. And because we're working in really arid areas, most people don't want to go there. Nobody wants to be working in 52-degree heat. So this is why we're kind of approaching it and really trying to look at the worst parts of Australia, because there's lots of regen work and conservation work happening in areas that already kind of have a foundation or a basis, whereas these areas that these Indigenous groups work, you know, and live on are just, it's just horrible. They just need all the help they can get. And so it does require, and that's why coming up with a rover is another idea.
And I know I've got the floor for a minute, but what can we do? I mean, we've got a group of people. Is it funding you want? Is it awareness? What's the best thing that helps you?
Yes, thank you. Funding would be sensational. We'd love to bring our industrial designer on full-time, but we don't have the money to pay him to be a full-time employee. That would be our first piece, would be that. And then once we've got our prototype, that's what we found with every time we've met with groups that are capable, or philanthropists that are willing to look at what we're doing, they all want to see the prototype. So it's like, we've got to get to the prototype, and we know once we've got our prototype up, then we'll be ready to fly. But it's getting to that first step. So
what about I mean, you must have gone to the big guys, your Gina Reinhardts, your BHPs, all those guys.
No.
Plenty of money, their ESG they need some ticks in that box.
What we found is that they want the science. So because we haven't, and that's why the partnership with Curtin University would be fantastic, because it's 120 grand a year apparently to have somebody do the science, and we know that the science is there from the perspective of nature, but what we don't have is the science to prove that our micro digging is going to get the same effects as what the bandicoots can do. So it's all kind of a process, and everybody requires a different sort of set of parameters to fulfill the funding portfolios. But we're just kind of, you know, we've got an investor who has put in the first chunk of money, so we can get to that first base, and then we can, you know, we'll be in a better position next time to be able to step it into the next forum of funding.
Camille, did you want to ask your question?
Oh, just, yeah, Donnelly, I'm sure you have, but I was just wondering if you'd contacted the CSIRO.
Rob has, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also and this is the thing, is that we could do, like with Preston and the Spinifex people, like there's a lot of funding available to a whole range of groups. But because of the conversations we've had today, we've just really wanted to focus on getting the prototype done, because we just know it's going to make our job so much easier once we can demonstrate that here's our rover drilling the holes, and then we can go back to the people we've spoken to date.
So Donnelly, what lessons, if any, have you drawn from your experience in wildlife conservation on this Quenda chapter, about where resistance might be, about what's required in order to propel your vision, to grow it?
Yeah. Josie, I suppose that none of it has been easy. And nobody, like, who wants to speak about wildlife when we've got pandemics and a whole range of things that are happening? So political will is always an all-time low, even though there's a nature repair bill, and I've had meetings with Josh Wilson, who is the MP driving that. And then it's kind of, it's just do it anyway. It's kind of, and I think my naivety, like when I first started this, I knew nothing, and I so naively went into this MP's office and said, you need to do something about this. And I was just, I suppose, lucky that it struck a chord with him. So it's building the relationships with people that have that same kind of, but it's tricky, because even with Jason, like, he would now never touch anything to do with wildlife. I, like, when we first got the ban on the importation of lion trophies, the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party tried to get the charity deregistered. He spoke to an empty house in the New South Wales upper house and said that I was unconscionable, and then sent that Hansard and everything he had to say about me to all the hunting groups around the world, including the South African government. And so it was a pretty scary time. And you just think, God, so that's Robert Borsak of the Shooters and Fishers Party. If I upset him that much to like, it's just ridiculous. But they saw it as a wedge against hunting. And so I became enemy number one. When I was in Africa earlier this year with the New South Wales MP, who was wanting to be educated about wildlife trade and the impacts on extinction, and also how we'd progress with closing lion farming in South Africa. We met with the head of the Professional Hunters Association, and I had to pretend I was somebody from his office, because if we'd met with them and they knew who I was. So we rocked up to this meeting expecting it just to be one man, and we rocked up, and there's several, like, there's all the heads of all the hunting groups. There's like 8 men at this table. It's so intimidating. And, you know, if they wanted to get rid of you, they just feed you to the lion, you know, shoot you and feed you to the lions, and then you just disappear. So I think the thing is, we don't realise the money that's invested in this area, and the amount of corruption and illegal activities and all of the other things that come into it. So yeah, I think, and also when, like, anybody that's been to Africa, is that there's just something that, you know, if you allow nature to crawl in under your skin, you just become her loyal servant. It's like, I can't do anything else now. It's just, you live and breathe it.
Right. Amanda and Chook.
No, the chooks are busy eating my orange peel now. Hey, Donnelly. No, I just said I do. Like, who wants to talk about nature now? Now is exactly the time to talk about nature, because I've been doing, you know, I work in a similar space, and been doing lots of talks lately around the transition in the emergency sector from focusing on a fire truck putting out a fire. That's it. That's all we talk about, to, you know, recovery and our resilience. And now certainly we're talking about the impacts of climate change on our disaster landscape. and now the transgression into climate impacts on the globe and nature-based solutions. And that is growing momentum because a lot of other ideas are running out and the landscape's worsening weekly from an emergency perspective. So now is absolutely the time to talk about nature and nature-based solutions, nature-based resilience, and using nature's principles and guidance to actually rehabilitate and regenerate. I'm motivated more than ever to introduce you to my friend in Perth, Donnelly. You've got to meet him because I think that you might find some answers to some of your many questions.
Brilliant. Thanks, Amanda. That'd be great.
Keep going, and we might set aside a decent amount of time when you're in Melbourne to really have a serious business meeting.
Yeah, great. Love that. Thank you.
And the tent is here for you when you're ready.
Yeah.
Jump on.
I realise the time difference. The flow work has to some degree free COVID, and then the regeneration work. But I sort of heard from you that it was harder to get the Australians to focus on the regeneration for an Australian problem than potentially harder for them to solve an importing problem for another country's problem. It's not the world's problem, but simplifying it. Did I hear that sort of undercurrent?
Jacinta, I think it's because when you're dealing with iconic species, people just have a connection when you're talking about elephants and you're talking about rhinos and lions, is that they're really emotive. And so when you hear that the king of the jungle is going to be extinct, everybody's like outraged. And also, to be fair, with Quenda, we haven't really done any outward facing material yet. We're just we're still babies, and everything's kind of been trying to get it to a particular stage, and then we felt like we could then launch into the world. So the conversations we've had have been really interesting. We've learned a lot, and we're sort of at that point, I suppose, once we get into having our prototype and we can really formulate a good plan as to how to kind of move forward next year. So I'm in Melbourne next week for a week or more. So I'll be sitting with Josie and a few of you to nut out some of the problems. And there's just been some extraordinary people showing up as well, thanks to Josie. So the network it's just been so wealthy and rich in just the amount of people that offer support and guidance.
So, John, you're no stranger to the startup world, but there are startups and startups, right?
Yeah. This is a very interesting and ambitious project. It's fantastic, but I think it sounds like one with a bit of perseverance is going to get there. If these little robotic bandicoots can do it. I put a link there, which I work with a company that what they do is they match carbon credits to land regeneration projects. And one of the things which once people have got carbon credits want to sell, they want validated carbon projects. And so what Earthbank do is they use satellite data to photograph land generation projects and an AI algorithm to actually calculate how much carbon is captured each year, and so you can validate it. But it's one of those ones where you might want to reach out to them, but you probably need it to be going first. You probably need it to be underway. I don't think they're going to fund a prototype.
Yeah. Well, John, the other part, which is really exciting with Curtin, is being able to actually measure the carbon in the soil. So they're really curious about the rovers being, while we're micropitting, is that we can be measuring and collecting data. There's a lot of data that we can collect. And I won't tell you some of the, I will tell you some of the conversations about invasive species. Like everybody wants to use the Quendas to go out there bloody knocking off the camels and the cats, but things like the buffel grass and other things. But it's just, again, nobody seems to know, there's not enough data in some of those really remote areas as to how many camels there are and how much damage they're doing, or how much buffel grass there is and where it's sort of being seeded. So everybody's really keen on even just the data collection. So even if they don't microdig and they're out there just collecting information, and we can create a database that people can access, that's going to be helpful as well.
Yeah, great stuff.
I mean, what I love about your approach, and not just on Quenda, Donnelly, is your ability to kind of find those areas where there's multiple interests that kind of meet. So, and through that amplify the impact of the range of things that you do. And is that something that you spend time thinking about, or is it just something that seems to emerge through the conversations that you have with people?
I think because of it's I'm going to sound a bit woo-woo here, people, I'm really sorry, but it's when you can tap into that that field of intelligence, it's really just saying yes to it and not understanding kind of why or where, and just turning up. Like, I think when I used to just shit myself when some of these things would happen, and be invited to Parliament, or and it would just be like, just keep saying yes, just keep turning up, and the information will either come with you or somebody will be there to help, and you drag them along to the meeting with you. So I think that's the thing, Josie, is that it's kind of just keeps evolving. So it's like your consciousness taps into something, and then it's informed as the process happens, is the best way I can describe it.
Fantastic. Paul's busy typing. Paul, did you want to jump on and make a comment? And Donnelly will get to look at the chat.
Didn't want to interrupt, but I was just highlighting that what I know coming out of the museum sector, I spent 11 years in the Natural History Museum doing public engagement work with conservation. CITES is an absolute mess and a shambles, completely agree. It does absolutely nothing to protect species, but hinders everyone trying to do good work. I was just highlighting that the twin role of museums in studying and understanding species in a place, and engaging the public with the importance of understanding and conserving species in a place, is potentially a vein to explore. I was just typing that WA Museum Queensland and Museum Vic all have significant interest in this sort of area, but Kim McKay, director of Australia Museum, is the key. She's the super connector in this space, and comes out of an active conservation background herself.
Excellent. Yep. Fantastic, Paul. Thank you. I'll get a copy of that while I can.
Can I ask a very practical question? Just in terms of the development of the prototype, what are the key challenges that you're trying to solve, and what are the pieces of the puzzle that you need? And I'm not asking because I know anything about it, but just so that it's on the radar in case I come across someone who's doing something that may help in some way.
Yeah, thank you. So to date, it's been about finding a way to be able to dig the hole that mimics what the Quendas do, and not just so not it being it's easy to drill vertical holes, but then you find insects fall into them, other things happen, and it's really about trying to replicate the way that Quendas dig their holes. So that was our first piece, which we've got this guy who's from the mining industry, who is a specialist in that space, who says that's not a problem. So they're working on that at the moment. And it really has been not having, when Doug passed away, he was the one that could pull the machine together. And that's where we kind of really tripped ourselves up. But yeah, Kate, now we've got this prototype being made, but then we'll have to go into production. So it's, we'll have to kind of then speak to people in that space about how we're going to then roll out numbers of these. But our first thing is just to get the trial started, so that at least we can put it to the test and wait for the rains to come and see the results.
Yeah, just I'm wondering, you know, there must be work in this area in like thinking about land, autonomous, you know, vehicles on land in the defense, you know, in defense, or not necessarily with,
You mean
or, you
in
know,
adjacent industries?
Yeah.
Or,
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
everything seems to happen in defense, but no one knows about it.
Well, that's
was
the
just
thing,
thinking
and
this-
that's a question we keep asking, is about the you know, reinventing the wheel. Like, rovers are not new things. People have been designing rovers, but I think yeah, we've got to be also sure that the rovers aren't too heavy, because we don't want to be destroying existing flora and fauna whilst we're rolling out micropitting. So there's all of those parameters to be considered. But yes, the you know, the robotics industry, there's all of those things that could be contributing to the design and the rollout of the Quendas for sure.
I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, and again, I'm sure you've thought of it, but it is like, I think Australia, and everywhere, we lack a bigger picture to understand all of the different industries and system, and what's, you know, perhaps what's in, I'm thinking, you know, early stages of commercialization, PhD research, that sort of thing. But what came to mind when Kate was speaking, was like, maybe an angle would be like asset management for defence. What are defence currently doing to monitor assets in a big way, where something, and here's the limitations of my knowledge, but like machines or autonomous vehicles would already be tracking things across land that could be adapted for a purpose. And also the space industry, where, you know, grants, things, all of it. Yeah, you know, again, just brain going off, but I'm sure you're well connected with some of that.
Well, it's an interesting, and again, it's not my space. So Rob is much more, he's been working with the guys at, I think it's called Tidal Moon, and they're doing a big project with blue carbon. So he has much more knowledge and depth on the science and that sort of area. And again, he and Doug had been kind of covering that piece. My piece is kind of the rewilding space. So I'm sorry I can't give you guys you know, definitive answers or responses to that, because I don't have a clue myself. But it's one of those things I keep asking about, is that, you know, do we have to reinvent the wheel and create a rover specifically for this, when there's open source? There's Dave sent us some information about some of the open source rovers, but we also have the, you know, the engineers that are working on it. And of course, they're kind of, you can see that they want to put they're wanting to create something that specifically Quenda. So having to manage, you know, personalities and egos and that whole piece as well is can be a bit tricky when you're trying to get, you know, something manufactured, and then you're saying to, and I don't speak the engineering language, so that's the other bit that's a bit tricky, because they just, oh no, you can't do it this way, it has to be done that way. It's like, really?
It's a really interesting tension, though, isn't it? You know, coming up against expertise, you know, general capability and deep subject matter expertise.
And I think, again, this is why when I was working with Lynn and the approach to modernised CITES is how, Paul, you'd know, there's so much science that says CITES unfit for purpose. And yet, why hasn't anybody addressed it? And you kind of think the amount of money that's ploughed into conservation, and we are sort of saying, well, here's a, you know, Lynn came up with the proposal to the 3-step approach. And, you know, our piece was, you've got a trade system that's filled to the brim with the conservation sector who don't have a commercial brain. So you've got that sort of thing happening in that space. So we just, again, there's just so much in this, and you just need to be able to pull up, and that's the difference, I suppose, being able to get that overview and just see what some of the solutions could be.
So, Kalina, you've taken on big jobs before that involve kind of ecosystem development. You know, do you see parallels with how Donnelly's managed to get stuff done? across these very different networks of people.
Absolutely. And I think I feel like with anything, it's probably not the right terminology, but I think about like what's the brand of something, and like recycling or sustainability or innovation, which is my space, all tend to go through these cycles of having a brand that people kind of buy into and understand. I don't know that that's yet the case for rewilding, for people to really understand the crisis that we're in with it. It's like climate change is this big thing, and often people feel overwhelmed by it, so sort of park it to the side or do little things about what they things that feel within their control. And I feel like rewilding will be that, as more and more ecosystem players kind of connect in, because there are little pockets of people doing interesting and innovative things kind of in the space, but it's like there's like a surge of energy right now because it's at that tipping point where it's just so critical. So I think once there's something there, in terms of like prototype or whatever, and people start to understand rewilding as something that they can almost like touch and feel, because I feel with a lot of that sort of thing too, it's not in your home, it's not really impacting what's in your fridge or in your wardrobe yet, so you don't really get why it's important when you're thinking more broadly about people's interest or investment in some of that. But I think that's starting to change. So yeah, I definitely think it's about all of those players coming together in whatever way makes sense, and then it's working it strategically too. I think Jacinta, you talked about people's ESG strategies and those sorts of things, but then it's about understanding which organisations align with the earth-centred or the kind of heart of a project like that too, so that it doesn't derail or become something so commercial that it's in the hands of the wrong people for the wrong reason.
And that's something also, is that the vision for this is not to be, it will never be sold out to a hedge fund. It'll always be, it's to be set up that it'll be in perpetuity. And that in the Indigenous groups are the ones that will get the financial benefits of the carbon and biodiversity profits. So yeah, there's a lot to work through and a lot to set up, and but also just to be really open to the fact that it's a fluid kind of piece as well, is that to do it differently and not sorry.
No, it's I go back to a conversation that we had about how big your vision is, Donnelly, some time ago, and then coming up against the limitations of current sort of funding models or existing business models, and then that requirement, we've got to have data in order to do something new. Well, do you? I don't know. Again, I've just seen this scuttle so many interesting ideas over the years, because you just come up against a system that actually wants tried and tested, not new.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, everybody wants a solution, and then you present something like this and it's like, oh, where's the science? Well, you've got to bloody well do it. And it may not, that's the other thing is, there's all sorts of possibilities with this, and what we're doing with just that biotubation is what else could be possible? Like what, who knows how the land will respond to that? It's yet to be tested. So it's, I just, and that's, I suppose, the other part of my psyche is let's just do it. And even if it's small scale to start with, but my sense of it is that it will still start seeing results, and then everybody will be just, oh, and then it'll kind of flip on its head, but it's that tipping point.
I think when people have a visual, it'll be a lot easier to get people behind it, because I think it's such an interesting project, and I think it's when you have a visual, getting people on board of you know, something really positive that they can kind of contribute to. So yeah, I was going to ask you, are you documenting all of this visually? Because I feel like you're going to have such an incredible story at the end, wherever this goes, that I think, you know, it'd be really great filming this kind of, you know, the hard stuff and the good stuff and the frustrations, because I can just imagine where this could go. And, you know, people always see the end result, but to see what you've been through, kind of, yeah, amazing.
Frustration. Thanks, Alicia. Yeah. And also, you'll laugh at this. I'm friends with Joost Bakker, who is very much in that everything has to be able to be recycled, and he's into the regenerative agriculture space. And we were talking to Joost about what we were doing, and he just saw the Quenda and said, "You need to turn it into Mad Max." He said, "Make it look like The Interceptor." And he said, "I'll put it on my social media page and I'll raise you $500,000 without even blinking." And it's like, oh, okay, that's a really, and we kind of sat with that and thought, it's fascinating kind of process. But we loved it because of the fact, you know, Mad Max was all about the apocalypse, and that, you know, they were fighting over petrol, and here we are trying to prevent the apocalypse. And so maybe putting a couple of the Quendas in kind of a, you know, making them look like Mad Max just to film them for socials kind of talk to him about. But brilliant what, you know, how people come up with different ideas, and what's attractive to the public, you know. And not everybody is so much in this space but would want to invest in something like that. So all of those things. It's
Amanda pointed out a really interesting story. You might know about it, Donnelly. Do you want to talk about it, Amanda? Because I've been tracking this guy for a few years. Fascinating.
Yeah, so it was on Australian Story recently, and it's the guy that was working on developing it's seaweed that you feed the cows to stop the methane emissions and develop them into tablets. So he just had this idea and stopped everything he was doing. He's an artist.
He was a fashion designer, but quite well known. Yeah,
that's right. And he was just driven, again, couldn't really explain it, but was just driven by a problem that needed a solution, that he thought it was simple. And three of them got together, said, "We can do this, let's do it." Moved to spent all his time in Tasmania trying to find a place to grow the seaweed, and then needed to build the infrastructure and the industrial design to make it into tablets that was going to work and to be affordable to get the farmers to use it. Anyway, his story is interesting because it's not necessarily a story of already success. I felt his story is he's still struggling to make this thing work. And I think I felt like the synergies with your story were really interesting, because he sort of said, and then this didn't work, and then this didn't work, but we tried this and we tried this and we tried this. So anyway, it's worth a watch just to feel like you're in good company.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Amanda.
But what I found really interesting about his story was he had one of those aha moments as a fashion designer where he just realized that the industry he was in was just churning out this fast fashion, and so he was one of the early sort of drivers of sustainable fashion, and of course you know, locally made and everything, and nobody bought it because it was too expensive. So he was probably like 10 years ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
And then he was just sitting there despairing one day and came across this seaweed idea. But like you, he's not a seaweed guy, he's a fashion designer. And that's what makes it so interesting. So I'm just really interested in how non-experts and experts kind of work together to make this stuff happen.
And I think that's the difference when flow and doing the work to do with addressing species by species, is that it was easy to be, because basically it was just me doing the work. So you're small, you're nimble, you can respond to government really quickly, you have a collaborative partner, it's, you know, you're still doing your thing. But something like this is it's a big matrix of things, and all the things that can spawn from this as well is that, you know, there's ecotourism, there's all of the cultural experiences with the Indigenous groups, there's bush tucker, there's medicinal plants, there's regenerative agriculture once you can bring back, once you've healed the earth. And so there's layers upon layers upon layers. But yeah, I don't know, Josie, is that, you know, is it a sign of madness?
Well, I think we're probably all mad, right, on this call. But I just think the way that you kind of hold all that, like, you know, just hold all of those possibilities. And you've got this currently, you know, the Quenda technology and one very specific thing, but it's that kind of embedded in something that's so much bigger and more powerful. Really, really exciting.
Oh, thank you. And I think that's the thing, is there's not one person we've spoken to about Quenda who says it's a shit idea.
Yeah.
We're expecting, you know, you expect people to say, nah, that's never going to work. And you're relying on nature, like, oh, that's dodgy. Yep. All of that. Did
you want to say something? Who did I cut off? Jacinta?
Yeah, you didn't cut me off. But my mind goes to visuals, Donnelly, and
yeah,
you just said all the different intersection points, and I picture straight away a market map, a mind map, sorry, that's doesn't even make sense. It's just your idea in there, and then this would be ever evolving and never change, but every other idea it hits, you said medicinal products, nature products, and you know, all the different things that are, you know, defense, you know, and if you just kept building this of all the intersections of what touches it, that would be interesting as well, because it'll just grow and grow, and it essentially shows that nature's the hub of everything, right? And nothing's independent from it. And I just had a visual, as you were saying, all those different things that keep coming. Everyone's got a point. Everyone goes, oh, I've got that. You're right. Let me throw it on the board. Let me throw it on the graph.
And I think the fundamental thing here, which I love about Zach Bush, is that soil health is directly attributed to our health. And so we look at how unhealthy we are as a species, and, you know, our soil is depleted. And so there's, yeah, Jacinta, you're right, there's just so much to feed into it. But for the moment, it's all I can do is just focus on, we've got our garage. I just finished painting the garage, which was bloody greasy old thing that we're in, and then just getting the prototype done, and then kind of, yeah, step by step kind of piece. But that's the exciting thing about coming to Melbourne, because I'll be sitting with the Brains Trust and we can thrash out some ideas. It'll be really great.
Yeah, well, fantastic. I'm very conscious of the time, and Donnelly had a very early start to her day, and we get to have the benefit of you in Melbourne for a week or so next week. But I do really appreciate you taking the time to share the story, because I just think, you know, it's a really inspiring story, and, you know, the point's been made about capturing, you know, your own story. I think Alicia talked about it, because usually we get this glib representation that actually it was pretty straightforward, and it's never straightforward, this really important stuff, is it? And you're demonstrating such grace and courage in the face of, I mean, I just took so many comments down from the early part about the resistance that you clearly got pushed back along the way from people who said, oh no, it's going to take 20 years, and you went through. And so that sort of courage and focus, Donnelly, it's rare and very inspiring. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your adventure with us, and we look forward to being part of it.
Oh, thank you. It's really lovely to be on the call with everybody. Thank you for making time. And yes, it's a difficult story to tell because it's so emotive for me, especially, you know, that first kind of, you know, shift from being in the corporate world into creating for the love of wildlife. It's so deeply personal, so I can never tell the story without crying. So thank you for putting up with me in that piece as well. But yes,
don't ever stop doing that. We need to relearn how to feel, right? Yes, Camille, exactly. So thank you, everybody, and have a lovely evening, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon, Donnelly, and we'll see you in Melbourne.
Thanks, Josie.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye all. Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Take care.